And with that, welcome to today's video. It's called The Bravest Thing You've Ever Said, and it's a Vent fanfic, which means it's a bit heavier, and as you can see by the symbol in the upper corner, it has content warnings. In this case, the mention of past self-harm, so if you cannot handle that, that's perfectly fine. Just don't watch the video, that's okay. And now, let's go. The rhythmic ticking of the clock echoed in the room of the empty apartment. It was so much louder than usual, even louder than the thunder roaring outside as heavy raindrops hit the windows with force. The wind was strong outside as the world seemed to increase in speed. The storm made it seem like someone had pressed the fast-forward button as the outside world drowned in floods of water, but inside, time seemed almost frozen, still. Only the ticking of the clock reminded him that it passed. Tired eyes were staring into the vast nothingness that was his room. The odd shapes the shadows formed, blanketing his stuff, making it look unfamiliar and foreign. He sat at the very bottom of a pit of darkness. At least, it felt like it. The illusion was only disrupted when the sky burst open violently with lightning, as though the shadows were a thickly woven blanket that was ripped apart. Blinding light flooded his room for a matter of seconds, highlighting him in his misery. Suddenly, all the shapes that had morphed together, hiding him in themselves, shielding and wrapping him in darkness, gained sharp edges in the white light, angles and corners exposing the utter mess he tried to drown in. He lay on the floor beside his bed. His back had hit the wall and his eyes focused on nothing as he stared into the darkness. His arms hung limp to the side of his body. He could still feel the distinct odd sensation of dry tear tracks cracking up on his cheeks. He had cried. He didn't remember, but he knew that he did. His eyelashes felt sticky and his throat ached. He was sure he couldn't bring himself to say a single word, even if he wanted to. Another lightning ripped the sky open and its light hit his phone. The metallic glint thrown back at him caused images to flash before his eyes. A grey, lifeless world suddenly filled with color, a vivid red tainting everything. His skin, the floor, and the metallic blade shimmering back at him mockingly, tempting. He felt it, just like back then. The itch spreading within his system, his fingers twitching to hold on to the one thing giving him control. He wanted to control his pain, to decide for himself where to inflict it, to finally take it out of his mind where he couldn't reach it and into reality. Unbeknownst to the public eye and even the ones closest to him, this is how he held himself together. Hundreds of tiny, washed-out scars littered his skin, hidden beneath his clothes and a bright smile. Time and time again, he'd put himself apart and stick himself back together. Better. He just needed to put himself back together better. But despite his attempts, it left scars. Scars that were proof that he wasn't perfect. That other than the rest of them, he had to manually be put apart and corrected to be good. That there was something wrong with him. With the lightning, the red of his memories faded, but the temptation stayed. He was broken again. Broken in places he couldn't reach. He had to make them reachable. His hands found his phone, forgetting that the metallic glint wasn't the blade that had become all too familiar in his hand. The moment he touched it, his throat closed, and he let out a pathetic, choked cry. The screen lit up and he was greeted by the faces of his 3 boyfriends, smiling back at him. They offered a tiny spot of color in the dark gray world that usually only hosted red. Yet, here they were. Sakusa in his yellow jacket and with his black eyes. Kita's meeting his with a warm doe brown. And Eren smiling up at him with skin holding the warmth of the sun itself. Atsumu knew they wouldn't be proud of him for ripping himself apart. Even if it was to stay together, no one would. That's why he hid it. He shouldn't need this to hold himself together. He was broken. Tears welled up in his eyes again, falling with the same viciousness as the raindrops. He wanted to be with them, to be held by them. He felt whole within their arms. But that would mean admitting that he failed to be whole on his own. Another flash of lightning chased the metallic reflection over his face, teasing him, tempting him. He felt his body shake as he fought the urge. As soon as he'd give in, it would seal his fate. He wouldn't be able to see them for a while, if at all again. He didn't want that. Before he could think too much about it and what consequences he condemned himself to, he jumped up and ran. The phone in hand, he ran out of his apartment, down the stairs and into the raging storm. The rain-induced winds quickly turned to whips, hitting down on his bare arms, and the cold burning his naked feet. But he didn't care. This wasn't enough. He had to keep going. His feet hit the hard pavement, slippery with rivulets of water streaming down and assembling in overflowing puddles. His clothes were soaked within seconds and weighed him down with every step, but it didn't compare to the dangerous desire lingering under the surface he tried to run from. It clung to him like a parasite, like an addiction he couldn't rid himself of, and all he had left to do was run. Run from his very self. He didn't remember how he found his way to Eren and Kita's apartment. It was a blur, but suddenly he found himself on their doorstep, dripping all over the floor as tears and rain mixed into a small flood. He stood there, suddenly paralyzed. It took everything he had to ring the doorbell and wait. After what felt like an eternity in which his eyes flickered over and over to the stairs again, he was fighting the urge to flee. Steps echoed from the inside. He heard a quiet whisper, unable to distinguish the words. Then the lock clicked, and suddenly it was too late to run. The door opened slowly, exposing a very tired-looking Kita, dressed in an oversized shirt. It was one of these rare instances he looked human. Atsumu felt himself tense and sobs clawing at the back of his throat. Excuse me, what? His eyes weren't even fully open, and he had been obviously fast asleep mere seconds ago. Guilt twisted his stomach and his knees grew weak. He wished he had never come here, but he knew that he wouldn't be able to take another step. His feet felt rooted to the ground as the water weighed him down and numbness spread through his veins. I'm sorry. It was the mere excuse of a broken whisper, but Kita heard him, and it was like lightning had struck the smaller. His head snapped up and his eyes widened as he finally recognized the blonde. Atsumu? He reached a hand out to the other, pausing as he noticed the small rivers still running over his skin. Come inside, quickly. We need to get you out of these. He tugged at his shirt, and Atsumu was willing to follow suit, but as soon as he moved, the room swayed before his eyes and he wavered. He fell forward until a pair of strong arms caught him and held him up. What happened? Are you drunk? He shook his head slightly, sadly unable to hold himself together anymore. New tears spilled over and he twisted his hands into Kita's shirt as he held onto him desperately. The smallest clothes quickly absorbed the water dripping from him, as though the cold that had taken his mind and body hostage was contagious, as though he was tainting them with his touch alone. He shook harder, sobs tearing through his body as he clung on to his last bits of sanity. Shinsuke? What happened? Are you... Aaron's tired voice echoed from down the hall as he got up to make sure his boyfriend was alright, only to find him in a desperate attempt to console their beloved, falling apart in his arms. Call Kiyomi. Tell him to drive extremely carefully. He nodded quickly and went to fetch his phone, leaving Kita to care for Atsumu. Tsumu, I need you to come with me to the bathroom. We need to get you out of these clothes before you suffer hypothermia. He tried coaxing him to get up. With a bit of trial and error, they made it to the bathroom down the hall. Atsumu had long given up on trying to control the trembling and sobs. He couldn't, no matter how much he tried. Kita set him down on the edge of the bathtub when Aaron appeared only a few seconds later. He was on his way. He promised to be careful. The string around his throat seemed to tighten. If something were to happen to Sakusa because of him, he could never forgive himself. His nails dug themselves into the flesh of his arms as their possibilities flashed before his eyes, causing deeper and deeper marks. Good. Can you please fetch us some dry clothes? Of course. With that, he disappeared again and Kita turned back to Atsumu. He gently placed his hands above his and loosened the grip around his arms. Wordlessly, his hands wandered to the hem of his shirt, but Atsumu stopped him. His fingers closed around Kita's wrists, and he avoided looking at the other directly. They had never seen this part of him. He had always been careful not to expose the pale lines on his shoulders and hips. Atsumu, we need to remove these. You'll get very sick. If you can do it on your own, I'll leave, but we have to get you into warm, dry clothes. He knew that. He knew, but he was scared. His eyes scarcely scanned the room, and even at this small glance he could identify the metal glint of a razor laying in the sink. His limbs were still shaking. He couldn't do it alone. He knew he couldn't. He knew he shouldn't be alone right now. I'm sorry. There is no reason to apologize. He waited patiently until Atsumu let his hand sink down and gave a small nod, giving him the okay to proceed. He held his breath. Kita pulled the drenched shirt, nothing but a flimsy t-shirt, over his head and froze. Atsumu refused to look at him. He didn't want to see the shock and disappointment reflecting in his eyes. Didn't want to see the rejection once he'd noticed how broken the setup was. He knew that the vigilant eyes were tracing the uneven patterns he had carved into his skin, that they'd take note of how old and washed out they were already. He didn't want to see the moment realization would dawn on him. I need help. Please. I don't want... For a brief second, his eyes flickered over to the razor again. He could hear Kita's breath hitch and take up in speed. Slowly, the warm hands vanished from his skin, and Atsumu could physically feel how his stomach clenched and his lungs struggled for air. The silver hair took a step back, but instead of leaving, he walked over to the sink, and before Atsumu knew what he was doing, the razor had disappeared into the bin, out of sight. Kida didn't say a word as he turned back again, back to removing his drenched clothes, only to stagger once more when he saw his thighs. His hands ghosted over the area, never really making contact with the battered skin, ripped open and put together again, torn apart and stitched together. Tsuma. His voice was broken, meek, nothing like the Kida he knew. It broke something within him, and against his will his eyes found Kida's, wide in shock and filled to the brim with pain as the tears overflowed. Before he found the words to reply, the door opened again. A disheveled-looking Sakusa stood in the frame, accompanied by Eren. This time, he wasn't prepared. He hadn't the time to look away before realization made their eyes widen, and them freeze mid-movement, as they took in the very same thing Kida had discovered. The scars he managed to hide for years, now being dragged into the limelight. What? Why? Tsumu, why would you? He could see it as clear as dawn. It was as though the sound of glass breaking filled the room as Sakusa's world shattered. Here it was, raw and out in the open. Everything he told them, the image they had of him, was a lie. He wasn't put together or strong. He was frail and weak, fractured beyond recognition. He couldn't even recognize himself in his own reflection. For a long moment, silence weighed heavy in the air. No one knew what to say. No one had words for what they found themselves confronted with. And Hatsumu didn't have the strength anymore to continue. It was Kida. It was always Kida who was the voice of reason. The one able to look straight ahead when everybody else was caught in the fog and deception. He reached for the clothes Eren brought. Here, I'll help you. You need to warm up. He pulled the hoodie over his head and helped him stand up to put on the sweatpants. He reached for a small towel and gently dried his hair and face, and from the corner of his eye, he could see Eren putting an arm around Sakusa and leaving the room. Silent tears followed their leave, but Kida continued to wipe them away gently. It's okay. We got you now. You're safe. A sob clawed its way from his throat and he clung to Kida's shirt again. Careful, wait. You'll get wet again. Let me bring you to the others, then I'll change and join you. Atsumu nodded hesitantly. He didn't want to let go of Kida, but as soon as they arrived in the living room, he found that the couch had been pushed off to the side and a small, comfortable nest of futons and pillows was set up in the middle before the TV. Eren immediately rushed to his side as they walked in and took him in his arms while Kida went off to change. He guided him to where Sakusa was already sitting on the pillows, now too dressed in comfortable, dry pajamas. The hoodie smelled like Eren, and he hid deep within the comforting scent as the tears slowly subsided. With no more left to cry, he was only shaken by silent sobs occasionally. Sakusa took his hand hesitantly in an attempt to stop the trembling, while Eren still held him close to his side. We got you. It's gonna be okay. It only caused him to cry harder again and cling to him. I'm sorry. Don't. This is not your fault. His voice was strained. He had never heard the aide speak so quietly, so broken. Kida joined them as promised, and eventually they ended up in a small circle with Atsumu half sitting on Eren's lap. How can we help you, Tsumu? I don't know. He didn't. This was the first time he decided to share this with someone. This was the first time he asked for help. The only other person who knew was Osamu. He would never forget the petrified look on his brother's face as he saw the blood dripping from his arm. He had screamed at him, had thrown out all of the sharp stuff in reach, and in the end was the one crying in Atsumo's arms. His poor younger brother, he was never meant to know. Ever since he had become so protective, so painfully aware of all the jabs and bullying targeting Atsumo, even though he managed to hide it so well before. It didn't stop him. Not really. He was torn between being glad to have his brother on his side, that he wasn't alone anymore, and the utter regret and guilt that he had to ruin his life like that. Osamu thought everything was fine. His life had been fine and he was the better twin, but then he had to ruin it because he forgot to lock the door once. Do you want to talk about it? He shrugged his shoulders. He knew he should know the answer. How frustrating it must be for those around him who wanted to help. Hell, it was frustrating for him too, but he didn't know how to get better. He never learned it. I'm sorry. It was all he knew how to say. Atsumo, you don't have to apologize. The opposite, in fact. You are here because you didn't want to do that again, right? He nodded. Would you have hurt yourself if you hadn't come here? Would you have struggled or been in pain? He gulped, looking down but nodded regardless. Then there is nothing you'd have to apologize for. I'm proud of you. Slowly his eyes met Kita's. A veil of tears covered the dough brown, but the former captain gave him a small smile. You asked for help. That must have been very hard. His words were interrupted by a cry and tears fell from his cheeks. It must have been really hard for you after all this time. I'm so glad you did. Atsumo couldn't bear to see him sad. He wasn't prepared for this. He had expected shock, fear, pain, and maybe even disgust, but not this. Shinsuke. How long did you have to suffer alone? He knew that wasn't his actual question, and somehow answering, since when did you hurt yourself, was easier. At least, the answer to that wasn't always. Since middle school, I couldn't get rid of the pain in my mind, so I took it out of my body. I created wounds that I could tend to and heal. Why? What have they done to you? He shrugged his shoulders again. Maybe I was just broken from the start. No, Atsumo, you are not. Not what? Broken? Ami, look at me. I'm the very definition of broken. What are you looking for? Some profound, severe trauma? Maybe that I was kidnapped or worse? Well, I wasn't. I have nothing to show for these scars. Everyone else could manage, but I couldn't. I was weak. There was no secret, no hidden abuse or anything. I'm just weak and dramatic. He hadn't even noticed the new tears forming. The short bursts of anger went as quickly as it came, and he felt just utterly exhausted. Atsumo, you were not weak. You might not have realized it, but you must have been through a lot, even if it were just small things at the moment, accumulating to a bigger picture. Kita nodded. Everyone reacts differently to things. What's traumatic to one person is okay for the other. That doesn't mean you're weaker or dramatic. Atsumu, you are sick, but it is not your fault, and you can heal. You're allowed to feel this way. But his voice gave out on him. From his side, he felt Sakusa reach for him again. They are right. It doesn't have to be one really bad thing. Sometimes it's just about repeating it often enough to wear a person down. The same way the ocean currents turn sturdy rock and sharp glass smooth, and rain wears away a stone. I'm so sorry that happened to you. It was not okay. You should have been safe. Atsumu couldn't talk. His voice was gone, and he knew that he was on the brim of breaking down again, but this time it wasn't fear causing him to panic. It felt so good to hear this. He wanted to believe them. He wanted to believe that he could be good, that he could love himself, that it wasn't his fault, that he was just a hurt child that should have been saved. He cried. He threw himself into Sakusa's arms and cried. Kita and Aaron embraced them from the side, and he sobbed openly, screamed with the thunder, and let it all out. He cried. It wasn't fair. He sobbed, but it felt good. And they held him through it all. He didn't have to hide from them. He finally managed to find the wound in his brain, the scars that are invisible. Now he can work on healing them. He could finally reach the pain that he deemed unreachable. He wasn't alone anymore. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I hope you liked it. And it was a heavy topic. But you know, sometimes I have to write fanfic. Well, if you liked it, consider leaving a like because it really helps the channel, and consider subscribing because it would be amazing to have you here because you are awesome. And I want to see you here again, obviously. A special thanks to my nerdy nekos. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel, you can click the join button underneath the video or just like it and be here, which I also love you so much for it. These are my other social media, and check out more videos in the end cut.
Step 1, wake up early, gonna rise with the sun. Step 2, get some food in you. Step 3, think real hard about what you wanna be. Step 4, everybody just do your thing.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up.